Okay, guys, today we are going to talk a little bit about the different types of colonies that were established in Africa during the colonial phases of Africa that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about four specific types. And here in the next week or so, we're going to start to get into some case studies about these different types so you guys can actually see how they affected the certain areas of land that we are talking about. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into it and kind of talk about these and kind of move on. The first, which is what we call a company-ruled colony, and these colonies were set up as businesses. They were there to exploit the natural resources for profit, set up their own form of taxing and getting labor, or slaves for the most part, as we talked about before in class. European countries granted charters that gave control of these territories to different businesses. The businesses paid all the expenses, and the European countries had the benefit of extra territory without really a cost. One of the more famous is this gentleman here, which you guys can see that he is kind of standing on the continent of Africa. He has the strings. He's almost like the puppet master of Africa, and he is Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes was a very famous diamond miner. He owned a company colony set up in the southern portion of Africa, and he basically took that area for all it was worth and made a fortune from it. Some of the most notable companies: the British East African Company, which was in Kenya, the British South African Company, which was in Malawi, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. The problem with company colonies is that they often became too expensive. And basically, they would have to start to battle with the people that live there, and then as a direct result of that, basically, then they would have to call on the country to come out and help them, bail them out with their military. And at that point in time, the country would just realize, you know what, it's more worth it if we just take it over and then run it ourselves. So basically, company colonies had a kind of a hard time running themselves, and they really didn't work because in all ways, shapes, or forms, they are going to need the help of the home country at some point in time. We're really going to see this when we start to talk about India here in the next couple weeks. The next is a direct ruled colony, and that's going to be the very first type of colony that we're going to talk about, and that is the ones that are directly governed by Europe. The goal was to assimilate or civilize the Africans, which we talked about before. I thought they were doing a good thing for them, and as a result of that, that's why they went ahead and took them over. European countries like France, Belgium, Germany, Portugal were ones of them, and Africans had little say in the government. One of the more famous ones, we're going to talk about this when we talk about the Congo, is this gentleman right here, King Leopold II, and he ruled the Belgian Congo with a very much an iron fist, and we're going to talk a lot more in greater detail about all of the atrocities and such like that that he did in those places. So we'll get into a lot more detail about that here soon. The next one is the indirect rule colonies. They were ruled directly by Europe. They appointed African leaders to oversee the colonies for them. European governors would also monitor the colonies. These basically, they went in, the European countries made certain groups within the countries that were already there more powerful than the other ones, had them rule for them, and basically had the power of the government behind them for this whole entire thing. Military would be down there to help them out, such like that. And this is going to cause some major issues, especially when we get into talking about our indirect rule case study, and that is over Rwanda, in which a lot of times once the Europeans got what they wanted from those colonies, they pulled their men out, and basically that's the point in time in which the side that was being used to work and such like that, that was not underneath the ruling power, would rise up, overthrow the ruling power, probably do some horrible things. And like I said, we'll get into a lot more detail about that when we talk about Rwanda. The last type is a settler's rule, and that's basically in which groups of people would move from a particular country for one reason or another, escaping debts, religious persecution, so on and so forth. And they went down to certain areas in different areas of the world and established their own colonies there. So they directly ruled the colonies. It took place mostly in the southern African colonies. That they would come down there and they would settle these particular areas, ruled by Settlers that wanted to make permanent homes in Africa. In order to survive, the settlers were harsh to the Africans. And that's when we're getting into talking about South Africa, the age of apartheid, and so on. So that's all kind of going to be part of that as well, too. So just something for you guys to know with that. A lot of times, as we talked about before, these colonies were established in order to basically provide the raw materials for them to fuel the Industrial Revolution that was taking place in Europe during this time frame, in order to make people more wealthy, more rich, more powerful, and that was the big reason as to why they established a lot of these colonies, especially in Africa. They also did so because nationalism really drove them forward. Nationalism, the belief that your country is better than all the rest. And as we've talked about before a little bit too, I mean, it can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing. It just depends on what steps that you can take to justify what you're doing. I mean, if you're doing it to the point where your nationalist point of view is that, hey, I'm going to take over this country next to me and basically put them underneath my control and force them to do what's best for my country, maybe not what's best for theirs, that might be a bad thing. If you are a nationalist, the point of view like, hey, the United States is great. I love living here. I'm very proud to be an American, so on and so forth. That's all well and good. I mean, like I said, it's as long as we just don't take it to that next step. And a lot of these countries in Europe during this time frame did take it to that next step, and then basically as a result of that, started to cause a lot of problems for these other countries. Okay. They were in Africa to mine for things like diamonds, gold, so on and so forth. Other things also was big down especially in the Congo, was rubber, and we'll get into a lot more detail about that when we specifically talk about the Congo and what took place there, the atrocities underneath the rule of King Leopold II. So it's all kind of coming up, and we'll get into a lot more detail about that here soon. Once again, goes back to the triangular trade that we talked about in slavery. And as you guys can see from the map, they took these manufactured goods, built them in Europe, and then traded them throughout the world for a number of different items in order to become more rich, more wealthy, and so on. So like I said, it was all about the whole Industrial Revolution that was going on in Europe. And then the last thing, how they were able to colonize these particular areas of the world was as a direct result of their superior technology, especially in the area of weapons. So very much an important thing to kind of consider, and how easy it was for the Europeans to come in and take over this part of the land. So that's pretty much covers the direct ruled colonies. Hopefully you guys have been following along a little bit with this. If you're not, rewind it, please. Watch it again. Fill out the chart that I've assigned to you guys. And make sure that you guys get all that information on there, because it's going to be really important for you guys to know, because this stuff will pop up again, especially on our test towards the end of this unit. So like I said, if you have any questions, let me know, and I will talk to you again soon.